We are the Early Career Librarians Initiative associated with the South Central chapter of the Medical Library Association. As Brandon mentioned, my name is Laura Haygood, and I co-chair ECLI with my colleague Sandra Desjardins. We've partnered with NNLM Region 3 to launch this webinar series on topics that are useful to LIS students and early career librarians. Our next two sessions will be in April and July, so watch our webpage for more information. We're pleased to welcome this month's speakers, Julie Bolin and Katie Prentice. Julie Bolin, MLIS, is the director for the Richard D. Haynes Medical Library and Biomedia at Baylor Scott & White Health in Temple, Texas. She manages a team that supports library services for patient care, education, and research for the Central Texas region of Baylor Scott & White Health. She also manages teams in medical graphic services and medical photographic services. Her library supports multiple nursing and allied health education programs in the community and has supported the Texas A&M College of Medicine for many years. The library now supports the new regional campus of the Baylor College of Medicine located in Temple. Library service is at the core of what she and her team do, and she's interested in continuous process improvement to have library service be beyond patrons' expectations. For fun, Julie likes hanging out with her daughter Caroline and her many pets, Tess, Bandy, Meredith, Theodore, and Ginger. She also enjoys playing tennis and hiking. Our other presenter is Katie Prentice, MSIS AHIP, and she is the executive director at the Texas Medical Center Library in Houston, Texas. She manages library services and information resources for the member institutions of the TMC library, serving thousands of students, faculty, and researchers. Previously, Katie worked for the University of Oklahoma at Tulsa, the Schusterman Library there, and also for the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio at their Briscoe Library. Her research and management and leadership interests include space use and usability, library assessment, and mentoring for early and mid-career librarians. Katie chose a career in library and information science after serving as a volunteer English teacher in the Republic of Latvia with the United States Peace Corps. She has a cat named Coco and loves to travel, try new foods, and meet new people. In today's webinar, our speakers will give a presentation on how to land your first medical librarian job. Thank you both for being our guest speakers this afternoon, and I'll turn everything over to you.
Thank you so much. Yes, that's me. I'm Julie Bolin, and I have been at the Richard D. Haynes Medical Library for a long time, so I hope I have a few things to share with you about working in a hospital library. Next slide, please. First, I want you to think about environment, a place that you would like to work. All hospital libraries are not the same, so there's a lot of different options out there. I happen to work for a very large hospital system, but there are also standalone libraries or hospitals that have libraries. There's just a variety. With a large hospital system, you may be covering a large geographical area, a huge number of beds and things like that versus a standalone hospital that may have a much smaller client base. Another thing to think about is, do you want to work in a department, a library department with multiple employees, or do you want to be a solo librarian? With departments, a lot of times tasks are broken up into different sections like technical services and public services. With a solo librarian, you kind of get to do it all, from circulation and interlibrary loan to literature searches, document delivery, acquisitions, tech support, everything. So think about what fits your personality. Do you want to be part of a team, or do you think you would fit better being in charge and just taking care of everything? So it kind of just depends on your personality type, what sort of environment you might like to work. There's also the traditional library work where you sit in a library and basically wait for patrons to come to you and ask for help. And then in hospitals, sometimes there are clinical librarians. So they're actually out with the clinicians, rounding, kind of there at the moment when a question comes up. So That's another kind of environment to think about when you're looking for a job and what you think suits your personality best. The other important question to think about is when you see a hospital library, who do they serve? Who are they going to support? Obviously, the easy answer most of the time is for patient care. So you think about supporting all the physicians, nurses, and guest physician's assistants and CRNAs and all the different roles that you have in a hospital. So you have to be the one to provide point of care tools if they need that. You have to be available when they have a patient care question. Sometimes these are actually urgent in a hospital setting. Not that often. I do have my fun stories over the years where I had the surgeon literally in the OR give me a call, ask a question. That's a little nerve-wracking. Doesn't happen that often. I've had an anesthesiologist contact me right before they were going into surgery because the patient unfortunately took some medication that morning that they always took, but they weren't supposed to take before surgery. We had to determine, is it safe to proceed with the surgery or not? So every once in a while, there's sort of an urgent type question. Most of the time, it's not that urgent, but it's still important because it has to do with taking care of patients and making sure there's a good outcome. Other things that we support in my library, definitely education. That's a big one. And that may be the case in other hospital libraries you encounter. As in my introduction, you heard we've had medical schools here on our campus. The local area, our community has multiple nursing programs. They do their clinicals at our hospitals, so we support them. There's allied health programs at local universities. So those are sometimes supported. And we even have a program within our institution called the Clinical Laboratory Science Program. So that's another just sort of in-house education program that we support. So you may see a variety of education support in different hospitals, depending on their teaching hospital. So that's something to look for. Research is another thing hospital libraries tend to support. Either bench research or clinical research. Right now, we are a magnet status hospital, so we are supporting our nurses a lot in recent years as they've achieved that status and continue to do a lot of research. So that's something that you'll see often. Other hospital libraries are really there just for the patients. They're consumer health libraries. And so you might want to work in an environment like that, where you're actually working with patients instead of their providers. So that's kind of fun, a different perspective. And you may find a hospital library that does all of the above. So it just kind of depends on that library's mission. So think about that when you're looking at different types of hospital libraries that you might want to work in. Next slide, please. Thanks. Okay, where do you find physicians? In the chat, no. There's the typical ones, of course, at the Medical Library Association, at their website. You can look there at other professional associations. Those are definitely a great place to start. If you have a geographical area that you'd like to live, you can look at hospital systems in that area and see if they have libraries and actually go direct to their websites, look for their job or career pages. Other things, I would just suggest those large job finding websites like Indeed or ZipRecruiter or Monster. You use those sites, set up filters to help you, kind of narrow down into a medical library position or a hospital library position. I would recommend these sites just knowing, like from our situation, our HR department is posting jobs for the entire organization. So they're going to use a big site like this just to put every job out there because unfortunately to them the library isn't special. So it doesn't get its own special place. But look there and just know that especially if you're looking at a larger hospital system, that's typically where they'll be. Social media is an option as well. Some hospital organizations don't really seem to like social media and have logged down a lot of those sites, but more and more they are opening up and seeing the value of having social media pages and possibly posting there. Libraries themselves may end up having their own social media page if that's allowed. So they may post positions there. Things like LinkedIn, that's a good one. You could do some searching and see if you can find some professionals there, see where they work, and then kind of get an idea of what hospitals might have positions in the future. Networking is just kind of always important, whether it's, in person or virtual. So keep that in mind when you're trying to find some positions. Next slide, please. All right, if you found a position, next you have to move on to the whole application process. I just want to point out, since we're looking at hospital libraries, it's going to be very specific to that hospital or hospital system. So there's not really a lot of hints there. Just go to their page and look for their job or career page and work through their system. But I will recommend that you fill out the application completely, follow all the directions. Unfortunately, if you have some kind of hiccup or incomplete application, your application may not make it to the hiring manager. So you want to just make sure you're checking all the boxes and doing that. And I do recommend reaching out to the HR department for the organization if you have any kind of technical difficulties. One, they want to be able to fix it. Two, you want to make sure your application gets submitted correctly and gets to the right people. So definitely ask for help if you need it. One of the things I have encountered over the years that our HR department has added a video session to the application process, where they have a few questions that you read in advance and then you get to record a short video answer to. So sometimes that's a little hiccup where technical difficulties can happen. It's actually really a neat addition to the application process, just because it's good for the hiring manager and it's good for the applicant. So I would say don't skip a step, even if it's a little challenging. You get the question in advance, so you have time to prepare your answer. And that just gives you, another opportunity to make a good impression on the hiring manager. So follow through with that and complete the entire application, including videos if asked. I would say that you definitely want to make your qualifications prominent when you're filling out an application. You want to get past the initial screen with the HR department, and so that they know you're qualified for the position. You want to highlight any transferable skills you have. You may not have worked in a medical library before, but you have skills that are applicable. So make sure you highlight those. If database searching, for example, if you've done that in previous jobs or even just in your education, go ahead and talk about it. Talk about the ones it's a small world in a sense within the library world. So we're going to know what your skills are if you can highlight what you've done before. Next slide, please. The resume and cover letter. First, I would say do write the cover letter. I think it's really helpful. As a hiring manager in the past, I like to get these letters. I think it shows that you care enough about the job to take the time to write the letter. So I think that is important. Again, it gives you another opportunity to highlight any transferable skills you have, just make a good impression. These kind of things can substitute for previous experience if you don't have previous experience in a medical library. I think one of the best ways to kind of help you get started with your letter is to look at the job description itself and use some of the language from the job description in your cover letter. So you want to, I don't mean just regurgitate the words back onto the page, but actually show how the job you're applying for, you have skills that are relevant. So use that in your letter. And on your resume, one of the things I would recommend is to kind of highlight or make prominent your ALA accredited degree. That's something that the HR department again will screen for. Typically in hospital libraries, that is a requirement for the position, just a minimum requirement. So put that on there and highlight relevant courses that you've taken, any past experiences, even outside the library that you think can be relevant in the library, good customer service skills, things like that. So do anything you can just to show that you're a great candidate for the job that you're interested in. Next slide, please. And then the interview process. So we've gotten past the application and the cover letter and resume, and we're going to be interviewed. No, typically with a big hospital system and possibly even a small standalone hospital, that the initial interview will probably be with HR. So they kind of do this pre-screening just to make sure you meet qualifications, kind of get a feel for if you're a good fit for the organization, gives you the opportunity to ask questions to see if the organization is a good fit for you. So, you know, use that time with HR. You can also, details like, is the salary within range of what you're hoping for? You can ask those types of questions in the initial interview with HR. Then you'll be routed on to the hiring manager. Typically, hospital libraries are not that large, so you will probably be interviewing directly with the hiring manager, who will later be your supervisor. And this is usually a one-on-one interview, but there are options. A lot of times we will do small group interviews, especially if we want to break it up kind of by service. For example, if you're applying for a technical service job in the library, we might have other people in the technical services area sit in on the group interview, so we can kind of talk as a small group. You may have the opportunity to meet other staff in the library. This could happen potentially like on a tour where you walk through and meet other members of the team. And sometimes we invite an outside manager, someone outside of the library in another department, possibly in education, to do an interview with the candidate, just to kind of get a different perspective besides the library manager. So, and I would like to kind of give you a heads up that you should expect some behavioral interview questions. These have become more popular. These are the kind of questions that we say, tell me about a time when, and then you fill in the blank. And these are really helpful. So I would say have some stories ready to go. Think about those in advance when you're preparing for the interview. And, you know, stories that show you have these knowledge, skills, and abilities and all these great things that make you a good candidate for the job. The intangibles are, you know, I want someone with good time management skills or great communication skills or the ability to pay attention to details. I can't ask you, do you pay attention to details? Because you're going to say, yes, of course. And then that conversation's over. But tell me about a time when, you know, you worked on a project or something where paying attention to details made all the difference or something like that. So think about those and have those kind of stories ready to go for your interview. And I think you'll have a great outcome. So those are a few things I know about hospital libraries. And I will pass it over to Katie and let her talk to you about academic health libraries.
Fantastic. Thank you, Julie. And I think what everyone will find is that academic and hospital libraries have more in common than we don't. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides and then make them happily full screen, which one of these days I should learn the shortcut for. But I'm really happy to be here with all of you to be able to talk about the academic medical library process. And I'll try to give some highlights of the option to be both faculty as well as staff. In my career, I have been both. Back at the UT Health Science Center in San Antonio, we were staff, university staff. And then with the University of Oklahoma, we were non-tenure track faculty. And obviously you can add a whole level of tenure track onto that for excitement. But there are a lot of similarities to the role initially and then your responsibilities as you go. So let's get this party started. So one important detail about thinking about your academic medical or health science library career is that you may not get there on purpose, or maybe you get there by accident. I was definitely an accident. I mean, you heard in my intro that I was an English teacher, and I discovered I love teaching adult learners. I don't so much like parents, and this was a big epiphany for me. So I decided to become a librarian. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to be a law librarian. It's awesome. And then that turned out to not be my favorite thing in the world. And I got a job in a health science library in San Antonio. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. So I don't think if you'd asked me at any point in my graduate studies that I was like, oh, you're going to be a medical librarian, let alone a library director, I would have said, nah, not a chance. So give yourself a chance and be open to it. Most of us do not have a science or medical background. The liberal arts flow through these libraries. So embrace it. What did you get in the liberal arts? You got the ability to communicate, to tell stories, to be persuasive, and all of this is handy in an academic health science library. So I recommend this sort of idea of read to be ready. Ask a Manager is my favorite non-library, I don't know, blog ever. If you're not reading Ask a Manager, at least weekly, please put it on your list. Put it on your phone. It allows you, and read the comments. And I would never recommend that on the internet generally, but the comments in Ask a Manager are priceless. Related to your job search, broadly, I recommend the website Hiring Librarians. You can follow them on social media too, but they post anonymous interviews with hiring managers, directors from all kinds of libraries. And you can learn about pet peeves, good things, things to feature. I read it, and I'm not looking for a job, and I read it just to see what everybody else is doing and what's going on. But these are my two absolute favorite things in the world that I would recommend. And every now and again, Ask a Manager actually features a library adjacent field. Normally the website obscures industry and field by referring to llama management or teapots. But occasionally somebody will work in like, well, I'm a llama librarian, and you'll see what's happening. But it's definitely a website I recommend about job life. The academic library process for both faculty and staff librarian positions is a village of effort. The committees will have your library people, and very often not the director of the library. Like, we're just waiting to see what the committee will tell us. The library people, probably the manager, campus faculty, as well as campus staff who work with the library or that role that you're hiring for, as well as potentially administrative leaders from campus. And it really depends on what role it is. If it's a liaison librarian, you're going to probably meet the faculty and staff from that area. If it's a collections position, you may meet somebody who works with the accreditation paperwork because they want to know about your attention to detail. And this process means that it could be a very long time from the moment someone leaves or a new job is created to even start the screening process, because these people have to be assembled, their calendars have to be synchronized. I don't know, Mercury has to not be in retrograde, and you have to be able to get them together to start talking. Often the university will require them to do a training on like equal opportunity and the law, which is good. We want these things to happen, but it does slow down the process, especially as perceived from the outside. The timeline, I mean, if I had to guess, like over the years, from vacancy to the new person starting could be a year or more. And that is driving the library as wild as you, I promise. We are not setting out to be difficult or opaque. It's that, every meeting requires a bunch of people. You've got to get everyone together. And when that happens, often what will happen is the HR will screen the applications, and they're looking at everything from, did you actually meet the criteria, to, the related sort of deep details. And then those are passed along to the search committee. And then there's just usually let's read everything through. And in academic health science libraries, you can consider the cover letter to be your writing sample. They're looking to see, how are you going to communicate in the future? Can you write an email, letter? Will you be able to communicate with your constituent groups? So the cover letter isn't a please see attached resume, love Katie. It's this is the job I'm interested in. I have this experience. I have the degree you asked for. I may not have this experience, but I have this experience. And we love to see that, especially in a position where we're not requiring years of experience. If you've worked in retail or food service, you can tell me about how you've managed complicated situations with potentially cranky people, and we're very interested. And it's not to say our constituents are cranky. They would never be, but they're often high stress people, and we have to be able to figure out how to help them without having extreme stress ourselves. And so if you have an experience like that, or you've worked with different ages or in the community, share those stories, and you can tie it together. You can say, oh, I see that you asked for teaching, and like, well, I haven't done that, but I've been a Girl Scout or Boy Scout troop leader, and I've took 9-year-olds camping. I mean, okay, if you can do that, you can probably do anything. So definitely tie that together. So once it gets screened by the committee, they'll choose a handful to talk to, and they'll probably schedule a half hour to an hour to ask a couple questions, make sure you're interested. And then they will potentially invite you to an on-campus interview. The pandemic kind of, in a good way, broke this process. The good news is that when an academic library invites you to campus, they should be paying for it. This is not the case in a lot of public libraries when you apply from across the country. So they should pay for your plane ticket, hotel, get you to and from the airport, all of those things. Many libraries make you submit a receipt, which is annoying and difficult, especially for early career and student budgets. So definitely ask, like, hey, can the library buy this, expensive plane ticket for me to, some random place in Canada? Hi, can you buy that for me? It's okay to ask. Like in my library now, we are trying to proactively figure out what we can pay for in advance. But at the same time, we're also doing more virtual interviews than ever before. And a virtual interview and an in-person interview are likely to be several hours long, maybe up to a day. In person, it may also include a meal, the ever important and weird academic interview food consumption. I've even heard of people doing virtual interviews where they have something DoorDash to your house. I'm like, let's not eat on camera is where I'm at with that, but you never know what a search committee is going to do. But what they're looking for is kind of, do they want to work with you? And do you want to work with them? Are we going to be able to sit in the lunchroom, and which doesn't really exist, like the break room? And are we going to be able to talk about cats? That's what's going to happen at the meal. Or at the let's have a coffee session during the virtual interview. They're just looking to see what you're interested in. And it is definitely okay to edit yourself. If you don't want to talk about like children or spouses or things like that, leave it off. You can talk a lot about your plants and your pets and the weather, and you can still show that you're a cool person that they should hire, because that's always a concern, because even though no one should be taking into account anything about the rest of you, feel free to leave it off, because they're not allowed to ask, which is really good. So once that long interview has happened, then the search committee has to get back together and talk. And talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And often they will decide to interview more people, which then repeats this process again, and it goes on for a bit until they choose someone they want. And often, to be honest, it's probably a ranking, because we know that it's now potentially been 9 months since their favorite candidate has applied, and they may have already gotten a job. And if you get a call 9 months after a library, offering you a job, you just can say, no, thank you. I've found a job. Appreciate you. But if you are interested in the job, okay, say yes, talk about it. We'll say yes to talking about it, and then listen to the offer. It is definitely okay to negotiate, but keep in mind, you should come to the negotiation prepared. And also, to be fair, if the library didn't post a salary range, feel free to ask, but you can also sneak. If it's a public university, go check out open payrolls. Go look at the university or the state's website to see if you can figure out what the other people in those positions are paid. Private universities are a little tougher because it's very opaque, because they don't have to publish anything online, but you can contact HR and ask if there's a salary band. And what I've seen is in a public university, if they post a range, let's just say they post 50 to 60, my guess is their target is the middle of that, not the top of that, because they want to give you space to grow into the position or role that they've hired. And there's a lot that goes into this. It's the budget line, it's the job title. In public higher ed, there's rules on like how much you can give somebody when they come in. The same thing for when you're applying internally, there's often a rule. But, ask that question. And my favorite website, Ask a Manager, has some wonderful scripts in there where you can phrase how to ask for more money. Because the good news is it's awkward for everyone, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with that process. And you shouldn't be afraid to ask, because if they freak out and say, well, we would never pay more than this, then you probably didn't want to work for them anyway. Or you look at your budget, you're like, you know what, that job sounds cool. I can do it for a couple of years and then go someplace else and make more money. That's also perfectly normal. And this is often the way the world works. So if you've gotten to this point, you've had the interview, time has passed, you have been offered and you accepted a job, then you choose a start date, and that's when paperwork explodes and you start getting the move. Often an academic medical library will also help you with moving expenses. And that could be either the library will pay the moving company directly, which is nice because then you don't have to front the cash to move, or sometimes they make you give a receipt. Seen both ways. Also, sometimes they're like, well, we can't pay for moving, but how about you do this thing for us like a consultant and we can give you a little extra money when you start. It's also awkward because you have to front the payment for that moving, but this gets you where you want to be. Hopefully, the academic library also gives you a buddy, somebody who may have also moved to the area recently to help you look for a place to live. Some people don't want any help, and that's also good. But I've been the beneficiary of that several times when I've moved and somebody says, well, hey, here's what I know about the area. Some of the larger academic medical libraries may also, if you didn't go for an interview, they may also pay for you to visit before you start so that you're sure just to see the area. And sometimes in the interview, they'll also allow you to bring someone along, like a partner or spouse or family member, so that you can see the area and picture yourself living there. Because remember, the job application process works both ways. They really want you to like them and potentially say yes. And of course, you really want them to like you so that they'll offer you the job. And so remember, they're putting their best selves forward. And even though it's a long process, you can check in if you haven't heard. There are some definite problems with libraries just disappearing, filling the job and never telling anyone. But if you haven't heard anything in 6 months, you can always just check back in with the HR. If there's an email, you can do that so it feels less confrontational, but you can also call, say, hi, have you made a decision yet? Am I still in consideration? And they'll either answer you in a vague way, which is probably yes, you're still in consideration, or they'll say no, and then you say, thank you, you could have told me several months ago. But that is definitely one of the challenges. And before the pandemic, I think many hiring officials said, oh, well, we just get too many applications to possibly contact everyone. That's kind of nonsense because the systems are automated now and you can check the little boxes and hit the button that says, please notify that they're no longer under consideration. So that is a little bit of a cop-out because the technology is there, especially if they're using a system. In libraries like mine, which are very small, we actually have you email your documents to our HR person who sends back a form to fill out. And so ours is much less automated, but it means that it's much easier to find somebody in HR. So finding these jobs is definitely a mystery. As Julie said, they're all over the place. The interesting factor of most of these websites is that they cost the library money. So many of them are not free. And so what we're looking for is that where do we get the best bang for our buck? Or where can we share them for free where we know people will see them? And interestingly, the I Need a Library Job website is probably one of the easy to find ones that's passed around in graduate school programs. But the Medical Library Association, ALA, of course, here in Texas, the Texas Library Association, if you are on Facebook, the ever weird library think tank group of 40,000 librarians posts a lot of jobs with a lot of commentary from the group on, well, I don't see a salary in that one. What's going on? And what do we know about this place? And so a job post there is priceless because you'll often see some comments and questions from the community who are probably not applying to the job, but they're doing a good job calling out challenges and problems with postings. But definitely, if there's an area of the country you are targeting, go look at their library websites and the university HR websites. And definitely, and if we ever got the chat box open, you could share more. And the other caveat to all of this is that job titles in university libraries are wacky, jargon-filled titles. There'll be liaison librarian. There'll be resource management and collections specialist. And you're like, I just want to be a librarian, you know? So keep in mind that you may have to look for the titles. Many of, I think more in the Northeast, we're seeing a lot more of the informationist job titles. You may also see, like, we're looking for an instructor, but that's because it's probably a faculty status library position. So look at the duties and see if it's a job you want, even if the title is just plain wacky. The good news is if the title is exciting to you, it'll look awesome on your resume or CV. But definitely don't let the weird job titles send you away because they're trying to be descriptive, but then we got them filled with librarian jargony words. So I would just want to take a second and look at a posting, and this will be spread over a couple pages. This is a job post that's open right now in Chicago at Northwestern University. Notice it starts with directions. Applications only will be in there, so they're not kidding. And then they also say you have to submit a PDF, which that's very interesting. But they also tell you very clearly what to do with your references. And then it also says your references will be contacted directly. In academic libraries, there are still some that want letters attached with your application. Many of us have stopped doing that or even stopped asking for it because there's a huge inequity of who can get a reference letter. And frankly, pretty much anybody can get some good reference letters. But you know, whether or not your reference will be contacted directly by the automated system or not, you should warn them that you've applied for the jobs or you're applying for jobs, and then make sure you have their current contact information. There'll be a point in your career where everyone starts to retire and you're like, what has happened to my old bosses and managers and supervisors? And, you know, if you're in contact with them, ask them if you can have their email and then just put a note that says, hi, this was my supervisor and he or she is retired. You know, they're available at this@gmail.com. But what's cool about this position is notice it's a research impact librarian. And we're thinking, well, what's a research impact librarian? Well, and you read down, it also says we strongly encourage early career librarians. You're like, okay, this is great. We're reading it. They also very clearly note that they have a hybrid work schedule. So we're like, yes, I like to sit at home in my PJs. But then, you know, they begin to describe supporting individuals and groups in understanding visualization, reporting of impact and care efforts. And then you're like, okay, services groups. You're like, well, it sounds awfully just like librarian work with a little researchy angle, but it's in the medical library. So as this goes on, you'll notice that it talks about this classes, analysis, work, but then reference. So this is still at its core a reference librarian of some sort. So it has used a fancy job title about research and impact, a little trendy, but at its core, you still see that it's providing direct information services, which is cool. Then they all get into preferred and required resources. And this is, you know, we've all heard that statistic about how men will apply for a job if they meet one of the required and women will wait until we hit 100. Hey, if you're, you know, a quarter of the percentage, you know, 25% of them, go for it, because you never know what the pool is going to be like. They will often explain, this one's interesting because it says master's degree and, but or other appropriate degree or experience. So this means they're willing to hire somebody other than a traditional librarian. So that means you're like, all right, well, I have my master's in library and information science. I can do this, and you go and apply. And then it says demonstrate it's instructional reference. Then this is, have you ever taught a class? And my guess is everyone has. And then have you tried a database service? You know, can you use PubMed or even Google Scholar? And then Excel, we all love Excel. and then your ability to work as part of a team. So all you have to do is think, oh, okay, well, I have that. I can explain it. And then they get down to preferred. And preferred is where you can shine if you don't have all of the requireds, because you're just trying to have more than somebody else or something different that'll help you stand out. And notice it starts with interest in topics. And you're like, oh, I am interested in a lot. So think about yourself that way. I mean, I honestly, bibliometrics is cool, and I would love to see more of it happening. And then as it ends, there's often the what I would call the standard HR boilerplate, but this is different in every university, and it will be different in both public and private universities. They're always going to talk about the law. They're also going potentially, you may see a land acknowledgement, and then now, depending on the medical school and the state, you may see a notice about vaccination status. But they're going to tell you how they work. And so this one says, we strongly encourage people from all backgrounds to apply. And so, I mean, you can see their statement, and there's no way to know if they really mean it. But if you're interested in the position and you see it, I'll go for it and apply. And that's sort of the fun of seeing it. And so we've talked a little bit about this process and how it works, but depending on the university, you may see a note about you may have to apply, send a CV or a resume. And this then sends everyone to Google to say difference between a CV and a resume. And at its core, the difference is the level of detail. My official academic length CE now, after a few years of work, is like 23 pages. That's not what anybody's looking for in an early career librarian. They're just looking for your ability to display your information and provide what they want. And also in that portal that we've talked about, just be prepared to copy and paste a lot of details from your resume. That's just the joy of HR, and we're sorry. Someday the HR systems will be able to scan the documents, but we're not there yet. And what's important about the CV and the resume and the cover letter is that you've edited your document. It clearly gives you a chance to tell your story, to explain why you're interested in the job, what makes you the best choice. You don't want to hide your light. If you've done something cool, definitely make sure it's on there somewhere. And I know that in the beginning of my career, I had several job interviews, just the preliminary ones, only because they wanted to ask me about a job I had in college. Did they really want to hire me? I don't know. But they just wanted to ask me about Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama, where I worked in college. But I used that as an example, even after graduate school, because I had to learn something that I didn't know to teach to learners. Sure, it was space history and like how to build a rocket, but if I can do that in space history, I can do that in evidence-based medicine. Ta-da. And so think about those things that you've done, and then very importantly, proofread. And there's a lot of privilege that comes in the declaration to proofread, but there are some librarians who will disregard application packets because of typos. I think that's tacky because we're all entitled to have a typo, but we still see it a little bit. So if you have someone you trust in your life, ask them to read your documents and check them over for things like alignment. That's that attention to detail that Julie mentioned. See how it looks and how it's working for you, so that somebody else looks at it and can say, this looks great, go forth and send it. And that hopefully will let yours stand out a little bit more. And just remember that it's a story and they're still very alike. You might see a difference in where education is compared to where your experience is, or the level of detail about each position. And in your early career, include those jobs, like your college job at camp, or your work with the community. And you can bullet point that and explain what you did and how it kind of relates. And even don't hide those customer service positions that you may have had in college or before or during grad school. In grad school, actually, I had a job. I worked for a temp agency, and these people kept calling me back every weekend at a housing development office. So really, I made cookies every day and told everyone hello. But that meant that I could work with customer service and welcome people in, and I could tie that in. And obviously, once I had a few library jobs, that didn't need to talk about that anymore on my applications or resumes, but it was there if I needed a story. So really the job process for academic health science libraries, whether you're applying for faculty or staff, they're very similar. I've been asked for writing samples that are longer. Some universities will ask you for a statement on diversity, equity, and inclusion. They'll ask you to give a philosophy of teaching statement, depending on the kind of role or position. And these things you can Google, go read about it. I don't know that I'd ever had to write a philosophy of teaching statement until a few years ago for an application. Not this job that I'm in, and it's something that I had to think deeply about what it meant, and then reflect, and then write it, and then take a deep breath, and then send it on, because sometimes it's part of the process. And I will expect many of these things, especially the sort of nitpicky stuff, will change a lot in the next couple of years, as our cultures shift and change, as many of the things need to. But what we in health science libraries care about, and it's what you hear Julie talk about, is that we have people who are interested in the work and capable and ready to do it. And yes, there's always training, because nobody is born knowing about the cycle of evidence. This is not innate knowledge. We all had to learn to walk from toddlerhood to, I guess, baby to toddlerhood. One day you fall over, and this will happen in work. And so it's a learning experience. And those behavioral questions that you'll be asked in all of your interviews, tell those stories about, even if you made a mistake, but how you turned it around and fixed it, or made it right, or learned from it, because that's what we want to hear. So there is an ebook, and I think this will be shared in the chat, called Hire Me, Getting an LIS Job. Some colleagues and I did an update for it a few years ago. It's pretty cool because you can see a timeline, and there's some hospital coverage in it as well. And then keep in mind that next month, February, which starts any second now, is Experience MLA, a free preview month. And so there is a virtual resume review clinic. So you can sign up for it now through the MLA website, and you'll be matched with a manager or director to look at your resume and talk. And then my favorite work-related books, because there's never a dull moment, Radical Candor, huge fan. And yes, it hurts, and you can't start doing this without alone. You have to talk to someone before you decide to just be radically candor, because people will not know what you're doing. Machiavelli for Women, fantastic. It's a book if you're a NPR marketplace person, Stacey Vanek Smith, who was on Planet Money podcast, and then really anything by Brene Brown. And then if you're thinking about the future of work, great book that came out a year-ish ago called Out of Office. It's really interesting thinking about how our knowledge professions will grow and learn from what we've done for the last couple of years. So I'm really excited to be here. And now I think the magic of questions will begin, and our esteemed moderating team will help us.
Yes, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, y'all. We did get the chat opened up halfway through. I don't know if y'all had an opportunity to see that, but we did get some really great questions in. I'm going to start by reading off the first one that was asked. And then Katie or Julie, y'all can decide who wants to answer. Y'all can both answer. And then y'all can also, our attendees, you can feel free to post your questions now as well, if you have one. For the first one, Angela posted, in the academic world, we have rather extensive CVs, not resumes. If you were applying for a hospital position, is it best to create a resume, or is it okay to submit an academic CV?
I would probably create a resume. You can always follow up later when you're being asked to come for an interview if the hiring manager would like to see your CV. Since you've already created one, it's not something everyone has, but if you've had one in the past, then you can offer to share it. But I think a more summarized version resume would be helpful with your application.
Thank you, Julie. And so then we had Carly. She said that right now she's a metadata assistant at a university, but that she would really love to work at a hospital, and that she used to work at a public library, and that before that she was a nurse aide and a phlebotomist. And should she mention those things on her cover letter and her resume, or should she wait until her interview for that?
Oh, I think you could go ahead and do that up front and just let people know you've worked in a hospital environment before. Just, I mean, that's something, it can't hurt. All the information is helpful.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie. And then next we had Genesis. She said that she's currently a student working on her MLS and a master's in health studies concurrently. And she wanted to know if that would give her a leg up in medical libraries on her job application.
Potentially. I mean, every bit of education, having a second master's is often, and that may not be required in the beginning, but in a faculty academic job, they may ask you to eventually have a second master's. So having that would definitely get you more points in the matrix for that faculty job. In the other library jobs, I think maybe, I mean, it would depend on how you explain it and what you've learned and how you can make it relevant. I mean, a lot of library people have been inspired and gotten additional graduate degrees, which is cool. I mean, but it maybe, and it would be up to you to spin it.
Thanks, Katie. And then we could unmute y'all if y'all feel comfortable coming up and asking the questions yourselves, y'all. So currently we were on Christine. She was asking, what are your thoughts on creating an online portfolio for academic positions? I'll let one of the speakers pick up on that, but if y'all wanted to raise your hand and ask the questions yourselves, feel free to do that as well.
For us, I mean, and I think I've seen it both ways. Generally, if we didn't ask for it, we're probably not going to look at it. But if you have one already made and you put it on your resume or CV, then, you know, we may click on the link. We may just be using it for like additional writing sample or like an example of a presentation you've done. But for the most part, if you don't need to expend the effort unless someone asks for it. Julie, would that match hospitals?
I think so, yes. Good answer.
Awesome. Okay. So next we had John. He asked, how do you ask for a salary increase after being in the same position for over 5 years? What words or verbiage would you use to ask for a salary increase?
Well, I would definitely go to Ask a Manager and read the script. But the key would be if you were already in an academic health science library and you've not had a raise in 5 years, the conversation with the manager about what's going on with the budget and my role would be worth at least doing some Googling to figure out what's going on at your university. Because if they haven't made a plan or had something in 5 years, there may be other things at play that have nothing to do with you. All libraries have periods where nobody gets a raise, which is kind of terrible. But if you've noticed that raises are happening, or at least maybe merit or promotions, if there's not been like an announced, everyone gets to sort of across the board cost of living is what they're called. But you could use your annual review process, or really anytime, you know, make an appointment to see your manager. It's probably not up to them, especially in some of the bigger libraries. And you can say, you know, hey, I've noticed that this job is being paid this at another library across town, see posting. What are my chances of getting a raise this year? I think I'm worth it. And then close your mouth.
I think in a hospital setting, it's a little different because you're one of many different kinds of staff. And so usually it is sort of a merit part of the annual review process that there's typically across the board increases annually, assuming that the hospital's in good financial standing and there aren't pandemics or crazy things going on. So, you know, it just depends. Usually it's a cycle. So it's sort of an annual thing. So it's not like you can pop up just any month and say, hey, today's the month I deserve a raise. Well, it may not happen that way. It's all part of a bigger system.
Yeah, and I think salaries and wages in our libraries have not kept up with inflation. Like I actually just was looking at, we just got the 2020 Association of Research Libraries salary survey. So, it's a little old now. It's 2 years old and they're finally publishing it. And you can see the sort of median wages by library size of ARL libraries, which in academic are going to be the big ones. And some of those have medical schools. So there's medical librarian data included. But you can see that ours are definitely not keeping up, but that is because of the chronic underfunding of public higher education or higher education generally. And unfortunately, in many places, the easiest way to get a raise is to get a different job. But that's very hard because you have to move yourself and your family or have a different commute. And maybe that's impossible. And if that's the case in your institution, it's worth, finding other creative outlets, ways to find joy in your life. And then making sure that you can set some boundaries with your time. It's if they're not going to give you additional money because maybe the library doesn't have it or they can't get it, or they're in a multi-year plan to change pay, which is what many libraries are working through. Because in my career, I've seen everything from merit, where each manager gets a chunk of money and they get to divide it up across staff. Generally, it's across the board. Many organizations, especially with the pandemic, have done what are called equity adjustments, where because of compression, where you hire somebody in higher because of inflation, the people above them are all of a sudden not making enough money based on the years of experience of the person below them. So they take the section of the chart, like a chunk of it, and just try to push it up a little bit. Those are techniques, and they're never quite clear until everyone surprises everyone. But it's definitely worth asking your managers. If you have a union, which is not rare, which is not common in Texas, you can go to your union rep and say, hey, what's going on with our salaries? Why haven't we gotten a cost of living increase, especially if the cost of benefits has gone up, which is what we're seeing in many places too. So salary is complicated, but definitely there's some great scripts in the Ask a Manager of how to do it both in person and in writing. So check those out because I've used them, in varying levels of success, and I can detect when they're being used on me. But they're very nice, and they're not threatening, and they're very calm, and you're just asking. And of course, right now in the last 2 years, we've had all the quiet quitting, and then you have rage applying. And if they keep telling you no, go forth and rage apply, go apply for 20 jobs because somebody out there will pay you more money.
Thank you, Katie. That's amazing. Thank you. So our next question was from Anne. She said, do you recommend doing an unpaid internship?
Oh, that would probably depend on your life circumstance. If you could handle not having an income for a period of time or less of one because of time constraints. I have not had that type of position in my library, so I'm not that familiar with that type of role. Do you have any experience, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I know that sometimes we hear that that advice given for, go volunteer in a library. But many academic libraries don't have the capacity to have a volunteer. Like HR tells you, you can't have someone do something for free that you're paying someone else to do. Mm-hmm. Which is where things get complicated, because if it's like an internship or a practicum, then it has to be special or learning. But the only reason I would think potentially an internship would be handy, paid or unpaid, and also asked to be paid, would be is if you've embarked on your library science career and you've never volunteered in a library or hung out in one. And think about like that, go all the way back to like middle school. Did you volunteer in the library in middle school? That I think counts. Maybe it was destiny for me, but I was my high school marching band's band librarian, which was sort of an elected position. I don't know, it was destiny. I had no idea I was going to be a librarian back then. But yeah, I brought that up in my first job application. I was like, hi, I was band librarian. I managed copyright for 200 people.
Wow.
No, yeah, I mean, seriously, I was mean. I was like, oh, you lost that? I need proof. Because there was a 1 copy per person. And so that, so I don't think, I'm never going to tell anybody to go not work for money. But think about how you can get some library experience if you haven't had any, or how you can make your work experience relevant to a library. And that could just need some brainstorming, maybe a little vocabulary matrix, so you can figure out like how working at even something like Whole Foods qualifies for library. You learn the names of all those vegetables. Okay, you could do medical librarianship. So yeah, don't accept no money as your only choice, because there's still no guarantee at the end, and all of us need to pay our rent.
Yes, I worked in several of the on-campus libraries at UT while I was getting my degree, just for the various experience. So if you have the opportunity to do that at your university, do that just to get, they don't pay well, but it's something, and you can write it down and say, I've been in a library and I've done this role or that role, and it's helpful in the grand scheme of things.
Thank you. So next, Sharon asked, are presentations required for academic or hospital librarian positions? Any tips for a successful presentation during an interview?
Oh, yes. That would have been a great detail for me to actually mention as part of the process in the day-long interview. But yes, if your position has any sort of public or teaching, they will ask you for a presentation. And in the places I've worked at, they're almost like behavioral questions, because we'll say things like, choose a database and prepare any database, and prepare a 15-minute mini class for an audience of your choice. Because we don't want to say like, choose the most complicated biomedical database ever. Because again, if you can learn one database, you can learn any. So maybe you're really good at a business database. Okay, present that one, plan it, be organized. And then figure out what you think you mean by teaching. That would be my tip. How are you going to do it? Are you going to make everybody pretend to be a student? And yes, you can tell them, like, please pretend to be a student of this kind, and then go. But, be organized, and remember that you've been given a tiny amount of time, because again, they're looking to see how you think and how you prepare and how you communicate.
I don't typically ask someone to do that in my hospital, but I would ask the behavioral interview questions, like, tell me about a time when you taught a group or an individual or something like that. So I'd want to hear the story, but I don't actually make them perform typically in front of me or a group that is interviewing.
Thanks so much, ladies. So next, Eli says, I am due to graduate with my MLIS in May. When should I start applying for positions? And how far away should I be applying? He also wanted to know, is limiting my search to my general area okay, or is it smarter to apply for everything, no matter where it is?
Whew. Okay, there's several parts there. I'm going to go from the backwards to the forwards, I think. For the geography question, a few years ago, I met a wonderful librarian who's now retired named Junie Jansen. She lived in Tulsa. And she always called it the rule of Junie, is that as you start your career, or in your career generally in a library, you can have a choice of type of job or geography. So know your truth. If you need a geography, be honest with yourself and say, I want to never live in California, because wow, I don't want to live under a bridge. So I never applied to a job in California. Okay, one. But I mean, one in like 20 years of library work. Yeah. Do I live in California? You can see how that turned out. So you have to know your truth. Or if you're in California, you're like, oh, I'm going to stay here because I love it. Great. Apply in California, but you may not get the flexibility with your job. That's not a hard rule, but it helps you think about your truth and where you want to live. If you never want to live in like deep snow mountains, probably don't apply in Wyoming. I don't know. I joke that maybe I've lived as far north as Oklahoma. That's probably it for me for winter. That's enough. But the other question about when to apply, it really depends on the system of how the application works. If it's like my library, where you just have to email in a thing, and you're a couple months out and you know the process is going to take an eternity, all you have to do is say, right in the beginning of your cover letter, I will receive my ALA accredited master's degree at this date. and I'm really interested in your job. If it's one of those online systems where you have to check a box from the very beginning that says, I have an ALA, I think you'd be okay because of how slow it is, but there are some systems which are like, well, they don't have it yet, so they weren't honest on their application. It's a circle of pain that we've caused for ourselves. So I think you're safe, especially if you see an entry-level position to apply a couple months early. There may be that question in the portal might not be a yes or no. It could be a other. So, okay, well, you don't have it yet. Click other and write, we'll have it in the date if there's room to explain. And you can contact the HR or the other library contact to ask how they would prefer that's handled too. You can say, well, what do you think? Some libraries can't let you start until you finished it. Others will say, oh, well, as long as you finish it in your first year, you're good, and they may proceed and hire you. It really depends, which is a terrible vague answer on my part. But in that sort of 3 to 4 months before graduating, it fits for a lot of applications, and you won't get immediately rejected. But in others, unless you can check that box, honestly, they will immediately decline. But then note on your calendar, if you really think it's cool, to go back and apply for the job in a couple months when it's potentially still posted.
Potentially. So turnaround, in my hospital library, the hiring process isn't quick, but it's not as long as your process, Katie. So I think, typically if I'm posting a position, it's already open, I want somebody. So it's a quicker turnaround. And but like I said, if you're just a couple months from graduating, then I think it's fair to go ahead and apply. And like you said, put it in your cover letter, explain the situation and that you're interested in the role and you'll be available on this date. And that could be something that if the hiring or the HR manager calls and starts to screen you, you can explain to them and they can make a note of it and pass it on to the hiring manager. So it's fair to go ahead and apply early.
Thank you so much. So next we have Matt. He wrote, I have been applying to positions but have often not heard back even after several months. What should I do in these situations? Also, because the academic hiring process can take so long, what recommendations do you have for applicants to do while they're waiting?
Oh, this is a great question. It kind of fits with the opposite of when should you apply, because you've already applied and now you're waiting. I would say if it's been 6 months and you log back in, if it's a portal, you log back in and nothing has happened and you don't see a status change, you can send a note to HR or call once and ask, am I still under consideration, or what's the status of this search? Because there's a lot of reasons that things have slowed down. But under 6 months for an academic library, people will be annoyed because they're doing the best that they can. The other half of what you should be doing in the intervening time is do something, because you could be gaining additional experience that you in something, like maybe it is learning all the fruits and vegetables at Whole Foods, or it is volunteering, if you can do it, maybe volunteer in a hospital, to go learn jargon, get a job in a lab. See what's happening in healthcare, things that could, one, earn you a little money, and two, keep you busy and learning. And then, maybe attend a webinar occasionally if you can. There's a lot of free ones from our NNLM sponsors. So you shouldn't have to feel that, that you shouldn't be doing anything, because then you could send an update. When 7 months after you applied, they ask you, they're ready to talk to you, you can send an updated version of your resume or CV saying, look what I've done since you've last heard from me.
Thanks, Katie. So Carly chimed in again and asked, how long should a typical resume be? Is it okay if if it is at most 3 pages listing previous job experiences and academic experience?
Oh, yeah. Don't listen to people. And I try never to be straight up ageist, but don't listen to anybody over 50 who tells you to only use 1 page, because a library is not that job. You're not applying to McDonald's where they just want to know you can show up for a job. Here, we do want to see a little progression, or what you've been doing, how you how you spend your thought time. So yeah, is even early career, and it's okay though, if your early career resume or CV is also one page. You've got your school, you've got your internship, and maybe like a job you had in undergrad, like, something that you can think gets their attention. But yeah, it doesn't have to be any sort of length. You just want to put yourself in the best light. Julie, would you agree?
I am agreeing. Yes, definitely.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm scrolling through the questions here. We have some great commentary going through. I know Dee Dee had mentioned an invite to attend the virtual South Central chapter chats, and she gave the link there. I think if Laura has that handy, maybe Laura can toss that into the chat again for anyone who missed it.
We did have another question. Do you want me to go ahead and read that one off?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. When working as a clinical librarian with a physician, what might the clinical librarian expect on a daily basis in regards to experience needed and the job itself?
Oh, that's a good question. We haven't done those roles here in 20 years. So it's not something that's currently happening in my library, but there's a lot of the physicians get together and you're kind of sort of the fly on the wall, where you're sitting in the back of the room listening to them discuss different patient conditions. You're trying to kind of anticipate what their needs are. So you're sometimes listening in, trying to pick up on what they might need more information on. So it's a lot of note taking. Then going back to your computer, doing some initial searches, sending them off some articles that you think might be helpful. So it's kind of a little back and forth, waiting for feedback so they can tell you that, oh yes, that's exactly what I needed, to, continue preparing for the care of this patient. So different things like that. I don't know. It kind of depends on the situation at each hospital, how that looks. I've heard of, actually following the physicians around to the bedside almost. We did that for a while at our children's hospital. We had a librarian doing that. Others, it's more just when they have their group discussions. It's usually multi specialty groups that get together, especially if it's a complicated patient and they talk about things. So usually it's just in the room. You're not usually actively discussing, you're more listening and preparing.
And I'm going to chime in too, that there are clinical librarians who work for academic libraries. I shadowed one a couple years ago. This was never going to be a job that appeals to me because they start very early in the morning. And when I shadowed with the librarians in Milwaukee, oh my gosh, they picked me up at 6 o'clock in the morning to be at the meeting where the residents were talking about their patients from the day before and then the coming day. And then they would talk through it. They would ask some direct questions to the librarian, like, oh, I need this. And then both of the ones that I saw, I went to a children's hospital and a regular hospital. The librarian would then send a list of resources or answers to the questions to the group afterwards. It was very impressive. My truth says that I don't like mornings. So that is not where I would ever see myself working, but morning chipper people. And those meetings were all in hospitals, in their medical center area, but they were academic librarians with a clinical focus. And so it was an interesting thing. And so if you're interested in that, I know Vanderbilt has a big program that's academic, but clinical. That's the one that comes to mind.
Thank you, ladies. We appreciate your time. We did have a couple of extra minutes. If anyone had any questions, please feel free to pop it into the box there. Also, we did have some people ask if they could get the transcript, a copy of the chat. We are going to send out a resource list after the webinar, so keep posted on that. And it does look like Tamara tossed in a question just now. She asked, any advice for someone who's been a stay-at-home mom for 16 years and starting a brand new career? Is there any way to get experience while studying?
Well, first of all, welcome to the field. And second of all, your experiences are valid and relevant. They're hard to talk about sometimes because, we, I guess, culturally discount the work of parents. But you can talk about time management and planning. And you can make just a reference to the family. Getting some experience, look for, depending on which role you're interested in for any kind of library. You could get experience, like you could just start watching additional webinars, like on things like cataloging, or metadata, or even data services. You could start figuring out how to data visualize something in your life and use that as an example. It is definitely tough. And I think there was a question earlier about how do you explain a gap? I actually think in this day and age, don't. Just leave the gap. We're not going to ask. I mean, they may be like, well, tell us like what you've been doing. But the reasons for that gap are likely topics that they're not allowed to ask you about, like health, family related topics. So just go ahead and don't explain it. And if you decide you're comfortable working in the, like, I've been a stay-at-home for 16 years, okay, we're going to be excited to hear it. If the gap is really, I was working at Whole Foods is my favorite example. Okay, well, tell us how that's relevant and go for it, because it's exciting and we want to see applicants who are interested in our jobs.
Thank you so much, Katie, for that. Jason asked, any guidance on what to expect in regards to starting pay?
Like Katie mentioned, that some of the state jobs, there's salary information out there, so you can at least see the ranges. In a private institution or in a hospital system, it's not going to be public. I mean, that's something that sometimes I don't even know. Honestly, for the people I'm hiring, I have to ask HR, okay, where are we now? Where's the pay grade? What's the range? I mean, so it's something you could always ask an HR department, because they're going to have, that job code is assigned to a special, pay grade and this and that. And they've got a whole system that's beyond the library. So it's just something you can look at. You can look at reports on average salaries and by state or just in general across the country. I mean, that'll give you an idea of what to expect for your first job. And then, ask questions.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's also very geographic. Like you look at something that you can benchmark it against, like here in the Houston area in Texas, the biggest school district in the state, HISD, Houston ISD, starts bachelor's degree certified teachers at $62,000. And I'm going to be honest that we haven't started an entry-level librarian at $62,000 yet. Working on getting the money. But it's like, look for a benchmark to give you some idea of what's happening in your community, and you may be able to figure out if that'll work for you, and then compare it to cost of living. There are whole communities and states and medical schools and hospitals in our flyover states, which would love to see all of you as applicants. But again, know your truth of where you want to live, and think about those applications. I mean, now Houston is the third or fourth largest city in the country, and I love living here. But I've also lived in Tulsa, which is miniature in comparison, in Oklahoma. And I loved both of them for different reasons. Totally different experiences, both living and librarying. So think about what you're open to. But salary's tough because it's very local and it's hyper local.
Thank you so much, Katie. I'm sorry to cut you off, but we do have a few last minute tasks here. We've gotten a number of great questions. We'll be sending out a resource list with all the information on it, some of the links, and other pieces that you might find helpful. We'll also be following up about potential MLA CE credit if you wanted to try to claim that. I did want to mention, because we got a few questions in the chat about ECLI. I'm putting the webpage link in the chat now. If you have questions about our future webinars, you are more than welcome to check that page. You're also welcome to join us. Membership is limited to SCC members, but anyone can join SCC, even if you don't live in the South Central region. And student membership is only $5 a year. So feel free to contact us if you want more information. Our emails are on that web page. And as a final thank you, Katie and Julie, this has been fantastic.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the network of the National Library of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel, or select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.